Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission is always the same.
Right.
We take a formidable stack of sources, we strip away all the noise, and we try to extract that pure, actionable knowledge that makes you instantly well-informed. Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into an organization that, despite operating mostly behind the scenes, really sits at the absolute center of global life sciences. So if you're preparing for a meeting, if you're trying to catch up on the pharmaceutical pipeline, or if you're just, curious about how new medicine actually gets made, this company is pretty much unavoidable.
It really is.
We are diving into Charles River Laboratories International, Inc.
This company is, well, it's the infrastructure, it's the backbone, the essential plumbing of modern drug development. Most people have never heard the name, and yet Charles River, or CRL, it's woven into the very fabric of virtually every new drug, vaccine, or medical device that's created today.
So to define that core identity, what are they?
CRL is an American pharmaceutical and biotechnology, a contract research organization.
A CRO.
Exactly, a CRO.
And while contract research organization sounds like a title on some, dry compliance form, its function is anything but dry. So clarify for us, what specific role does a CRO like CRL actually play in this whole life sciences ecosystem?
A CRO is essentially a specialty outsourcer. I mean, think about it. Pharmaceutical companies, biotech firms, they need to run thousands of highly regulated tests.
Right.
We're talking toxicology studies, safety assessments, efficacy trials, all to prove a compound is safe. And that it works before the FDA or, its international equivalents will even look at it.
So they're the gatekeepers for the gatekeepers.
In a way, yes. CRO provides those specialized, standardized preclinical and early clinical laboratory services. They are the engine running the tests that determine if a new compound is safe and effective enough to even continue development.
Wow.
Without that outsourced infrastructure, the development process for new medicine would slow to a crawl.
And they do this at an industrial scale that, frankly, is a little hard to believe. This is a publicly traded company on the NYSE, ticker CRL. It's an S&P 500 component, and it operates in at least 20 countries worldwide. Just look at the raw numbers from 2024. $4.05 billion in revenue and over 20,100 employees globally. That's not just a lab, that's a global industrial powerhouse.
And it functions as the critical bottleneck for regulatory compliance.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here, I think, is understanding the true criticality of that infrastructure. CRL isn't just generating data points. They are generating the precise, standardized data packages, the toxicology reports, the safety assessments, that drug developers absolutely must have to submit their investigational new drug application.
The IND applications, right, to the FDA.
To the US FDA, to the EMA, in Europe, everywhere. Our mission today is really to trace this journey. How did a single entity grow from, the humblest of beginnings to become so deeply and so indispensably embedded in the entire life sciences pipeline, covering everything from initial target discovery all the way to cutting-edge cell and gene therapy manufacturing?
That transition from humble to indispensable is genuinely one of the most remarkable corporate stories of the last century. So to start, we have to look all the way back to 1947 and the founder, a man named Henry Foster.
Henry Foster was a young veterinarian, and his decision in 1947 was just a masterclass in identifying a niche that everyone needed, but nobody was supplying reliably. He set up a one-person laboratory in Boston, geographically located to overlook the Charles River.
Which naturally gave the company its name.
Of course.
And the inventory. This is the detail that really hooks you. He didn't start with, cutting-edge analytical chemistry equipment or anything like that.
Not at all.
He purchased 1,000 rat cages from a Virginia farm. He started simply as a dedicated supplier of research animals.
Exactly. And this immediately defines the company's original core business, supplying local researchers with standardized, reliable laboratory animals. And it sounds incredibly basic, maybe even mundane.
Yeah, a guy with some rats.
Right. But you have to place yourself in the context of the pharmaceutical world immediately following World War II.
Okay, explain that necessity. Because for someone who might not understand the biology, why was a reliable rat so essential?
It was everything. This was the era of explosive growth in modern pharmaceuticals. You had antibiotics, early treatments for chronic diseases, and this is the key, the beginning of rigorous regulatory scrutiny.
Right.
Drug testing requires repeatable results. If you test a new compound in a group of lab animals, and those animals are all genetically varied, or worse, if they carry different undiagnosed background pathogens.
We call those dirty models.
Exactly, dirty models. Your results will be inconsistent, unreliable, and ultimately useless for a regulatory submission.
You're essentially introducing way too many variables into the experiment.
Precisely. Henry Foster's insight was that pharmaceutical companies needed models that were identical, predictable, and certified disease-free. He wasn't just selling rats. He was selling standardization and quality control.
I see.
His ability to provide that consistent, high-quality research model laid the essential groundwork for every single sophisticated service the company would offer later. Standardization was literally embedded in their DNA, in their supply chain, from day one.
So following this foundational work, the company begins its expansion. In 1955, they relocated their headquarters to Wilmington, Massachusetts, where they are still based today. Then, just 11 years later, in 1966, we see CRL's first acknowledgement that research was going global. They opened an animal production facility in France.
And that 1966 move is highly significant. It demonstrated an early recognition that drug discovery wasn't just confined to the U.S. Northeast.
It's not just a Boston thing anymore.
Not at all. If their pharmaceutical clients were expanding operations into Europe, CRL had to ensure those researchers had immediate access to the exact same standardized models they were using back home. It was all about ensuring global continuity of testing protocols.
But the real technical leap, the move from being a simple supplier to a high science partner, that came in 1981. This is when the company implemented the first commercial, comprehensive genetic monitoring program. Okay, let's unpack this for the listener. Why is genetic monitoring for a mouse or a rat such a landmark revenue-driving event?
Well, it's the difference between selling a commodity and selling a guaranteed scientific tool. Genetic monitoring is quality control raised to the highest possible level. By rigorously monitoring the genetic makeup of their animal colonies, they were guaranteeing to the pharmaceutical researcher that the model was genetically homogeneous.
Meaning, if a drug had a different effect on model A versus model B, that difference could only be attributed to the drug itself and not some natural genetic variation in the test subject.
Exactly. This drastically reduces the noise in the data. For a pharma company that is spending potentially hundreds of millions of dollars to test a compound, they need that certainty.
Of course.
So this move, back in 1981, proved that CRL was focused on repeatable science, and it bolstered their credibility immensely with regulatory bodies who rely on reproducible data. It transformed them from just a vendor of mice into a supplier of validated essential research platforms.
The 1980s also brought a brief but fascinating ownership change. In 1984, Charles River was acquired by Bausch & Lomb, which really speaks to the recognized value of these standardized essential services.
It does. The acquisition was a sign that the market was consolidating and that a major player like Bausch & Lomb recognized the stable, necessary revenue stream CRL provided. But the story continues with this powerful founder family intervention.
Right, with Jim Foster.
Yes. In the 1990s, Jim Foster, Henry's son, led a management buyout to acquire Charles River back from Bausch & Lomb. This return to private, then public journey, which culminated in their public listing on the NYSE, is classic business history. It shows that founder-led commitment to capitalizing on the explosive growth of the outsourced CRO market.
And during this period of ownership transition and eventual public listing, CRL dramatically expanded its technical capabilities. It wasn't just about breeding standardized models anymore. In 1988, they began creating transgenic mice and rats.
And that is a fundamental expansion in technical scope and commercial value. Transgenic models are animals whose genetic material has been specifically altered.
How so?
They're altered to carry certain genes or exhibit specific human conditions. For example, they might carry the human gene for a specific cancer or exhibit symptoms similar to Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease.
So instead of just using a generic rodent to test for general toxicity, you are now using a tailor-made model that can mimic a human disease.
Precisely. This elevates Charles River from a supplier of generic models to a provider of highly sophisticated, disease-specific research tools. And that saves researchers years of trying to establish their own testing protocols. It accelerates the discovery phase immensely.
And this focus on specialized testing and safety assessment continued into the 1990s when they began in vitro endotoxin testing.
This is a major pivot toward regulatory compliance and safety diagnostics. Endotoxins are. They're toxic compounds found in the outer membrane of certain bacteria. And if they get into the human bloodstream, they can cause dangerous fevers, organ failure, even septic shock.
So the FDA requires testing for this.
Oh, absolutely. The FDA requires that all injectable drugs, intravenous solutions, and implanted medical devices must be tested for endotoxins before they can be used. No exceptions.
Which is where CRL's microbial testing services come in.
Correct. They use a substance derived from the blood of horseshoe crabs. It's called the limulus amoebocyte lysate test, or LAL test, to detect even trace amounts of these endotoxins. By offering this critical in vitro, in the lab dish testing, CRL solidified its role as an indispensable partner for meeting mandatory safety requirements across the entire medical industry, not just drug development.
So the foundation is the standardized research model, but the structure built on top of it is just vast.
hmm
If we look at CRL's modern operations, they are a massive full-service contract research organization. What are the key pillars of their portfolio today?
You can break it down into three main integrated pillars. First, they still have research models. That's the traditional foundation. But now they're primarily complex, transgenic, specialized models.
Okay.
Second, they have safety assessment. This involves the necessary long-term toxicology studies that are crucial for any regulatory submission. And third, they offer microbial testing services built on that endotoxin testing expertise, ensuring product safety and sterile manufacturing environments.
I noticed a specific term in the outline that signals the next level of standardization: preconditioning services, introduced in 2005. What does preconditioning entail, and how is it more advanced than just supplying a standardized animal?
Preconditioning is the next logical step in efficiency and reducing variability. It means the animals are delivered to the client already study-ready.
What does that mean, study ready?
Well, for instance, if a study requires the model to be on a highly specific low-fat diet for 3 weeks before the compound is administered, CRL performs that preconditioning in their own highly controlled facility.
So the customer doesn't have to waste time and resources acclimating the animals and hoping their internal conditions are precisely the same every single time.
Exactly. It guarantees the model is ready to receive the experimental compound immediately upon arrival. It eliminates external variables, saves the client crucial time, and maintains the rigor that regulators absolutely demand. It's all about selling guaranteed quality and guaranteed speed.
This level of institutional credibility, built on decades of standardization, led to partnerships at the highest levels. In 2008, CRL signed a landmark 10-year contract with the National Cancer Institute, the NCI, and opened a facility in Frederick, Maryland.
That 10-year NCI contract is the ultimate proof of concept for their standardization model. The NCI, one of the most rigorous scientific institutions in the world, was outsourcing a massive long-term need to CRL.
Wow.
This move confirmed that Charles River had successfully transitioned from being merely a vendor to an institutional scientific partner, trusted with the infrastructure underlying critical government research. They had, at that point, they had become indispensable.
That transition to a critical partner really paved the way for the company's explosive 21st century growth, and this is where we have to talk about mergers and acquisitions. Here's where it gets really interesting, because CRL did not just grow organically by selling more mice.
No, not at all.
They built a behemoth through relentless, highly strategic acquisitions. We need to analyze those deals to understand the strategic pivots they were making.
The M&A strategy has been the core driver of their scale and complexity. You can really map CRL's evolution through 3 strategic phases of acquisition. The early phase, from about 1988 to 2000, that was focused on diversifying the research model portfolio and building out those essential diagnostic and testing capabilities.
Okay, so what were the key deals in that foundational M&A period?
Well, they acquired a company called Specific Pathogen Antigen-Free Avian Services, or SPIFES, which diversified their research models beyond rodents into avian species.
Into birds?
Into birds, yes. Crucially, they also acquired serologic diagnostic services from Merck, Sharp, and Dome, immediately bolstering their testing expertise. And later, buying Endosafe Inc. and Sierra Biomedical between 1996 and 2000. That solidified their internal testing infrastructure, particularly around endotoxin testing and specialized toxicology.
So they were ensuring they owned the entire quality control vertical.
Precisely. They were locking it all down.
The next phase, then, was the major leap. The transition from being a supplier and a specialized tester to a true full-service CRO. And that starts primarily with the 2003 merger with Inveresk.
The Inveresk merger was a dramatic international expansion. Inveresk was a UK-based company specializing in clinical research and preclinical testing, primarily based in Scotland. The merger provided CRL with a massive international footprint outside the US, and more importantly, a much broader service offering. It included managing complex studies, not just supplying the components for them.
You mentioned, though, that the integration wasn't entirely smooth. They later divested part of that acquisition, selling the Edinburgh Clinical Services division to Quotient BioResearch in 2009. That suggests a kind of strategic tightening.
It does, and this is where we can introduce some constructive friction into the analysis. Selling the clinical services division could be interpreted in a couple of ways.
Yeah.
Either they struggled to integrate the very different operational model of clinical trials, or it signaled a strategic decision to focus exclusively on their core competence, which was the earlier preclinical stage.
I see.
Ultimately, they doubled down on being the best at everything before human trials began, and that's often where the highest regulatory risk lies.
And that focus on early-stage integration accelerated dramatically in 2014 with the acquisitions of Argenta and BioFocus. This acquisition seems key to understanding CRL's modern value proposition.
Absolutely key. This is what established CRL as a full-service early-stage CRO. We need to slow down and define the functional significance of their newly integrated in vitro and in vivo capabilities.
Okay, let's clarify that technical distinction for everyone listening.
Sure. In vitro means in glass. It's essentially lab-based bench science, the very beginning of the process where scientists identify potential drug targets and screen thousands of compounds in dishes or tubes.
And in vivo.
In vivo means in the living organism, testing those viable compounds in their specialized animal models. By acquiring both Argenta and BioFocus, CRL could offer a seamless, integrated process from the moment of target discovery all the way through preclinical development.
So instead of a pharma company having to coordinate between, 3 or 4 different specialized firms to get a compound from an initial concept to regulatory readiness, they can now just use CRL for that entire early-stage journey.
Yes.
That efficiency must be immensely valuable.
It creates a massive economic moat. It reduces administrative overhead for the client, it streamlines data transfer, and it ensures consistent quality control across all stages, which is priceless when you're facing rigorous regulatory scrutiny.
Now, while the strategy generally involved swallowing up smaller firms, there was one major public failure in their expansion strategy: the failed 2010 attempt to acquire WuXi PharmaTech. This really highlights the limits of expansion when you face shareholder resistance.
The attempted WuXi acquisition was an attempt at a giant, defining strategic leap. It was aimed at penetrating the rapidly growing Chinese CRO market and achieving just unparalleled global scale in one single go.
But the deal was withdrawn after intense investor backlash, a major merger torpedoed by their own shareholders. That's pretty rare.
Yeah.
Was this simply about the price tag, or were investors fundamentally afraid of acquiring a massive China-based CRO and, the integration or regulatory headaches that might follow?
It was a combination of factors, but the investor concern went way beyond just valuation. Prominent large investors, including relational investors, Jana Partners, and Neuberger Berman, they opposed it vociferously. The proxy advisory firm RiskMetrics also recommended a no vote.
Wow.
The core issue was perceived integration risk combined with strategic dilution. Investors worried that a massive cross-border merger involving such complex, specialized regulatory environments would destabilize CRL's core business, which relied on rock-solid, predictable execution.
So the investors were prioritizing stability and controlled growth over this high-risk, high-reward leap into total global dominance.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It showed the limits of the expansion strategy. Despite CRL's executive drive for massive immediate scale, the shareholder structure demanded a more controlled approach.
And we can see this enforced strategy shift in their incremental approach to the Chinese market immediately afterward. The source material notes that CRL successfully acquired Vital River in the 2008-2013 period, which expanded their research models and services portfolio into the Chinese drug development market, but on a more palatable, incremental scale.
That's a brilliant connection. The failure of the WuXi merger forced CRL to execute the same global expansion strategy through smaller, more manageable acquisitions. It was a slower, but ultimately more successful path for shareholder confidence. This period also saw them acquiring specialized expertise through purchases like NewLab Bioquality AG, MPI Preclinical Services, Piedmont Research Center, Cerebricon, and Acugenics, all designed to broaden their existing technical services and geographic reach in a much more controlled manner.
So as CRL entered the mid-2010s, they clearly had the shareholder mandate to execute large strategic deals, but they were focusing primarily on solidifying their toxicology and safety assessment leadership. The cash flow required for these acquisitions is just staggering.
The numbers really illustrate the value of consolidating this niche specialized infrastructure.
Yeah.
In 2016, they acquired Will Research for approximately $585 million.
Wow.
In 2018, they bought MPI Research for approximately $800 billion. And in 2019, they acquired Cytix Lab for roughly $500 million. These purchases were defensive, strategic, basically swallowing competitors to gain immense scale, crucial toxicology expertise, and key geographic presence in Europe and North America.
And this scale creates an economic moat. If you are a pharmaceutical company, it's just safer and easier to go with the vendor who has absorbed all the expertise and has the scale to manage your entire pipeline, right?
Absolutely. They are selling standardization, but they're also selling risk reduction. When you work with CRL, you're buying their proven track record of getting safety data through regulatory hurdles. That is worth hundreds of millions of dollars to a pharma client.
But the most crucial, forward-looking strategic pivot, the one that really defines the future of CRL, happened between 2019 and 2021, the deep dive into cell and gene therapy, or CGT. This wasn't just acquiring another tox lab. This was a complete repositioning.
This is the $1.5 billion question. Why did they spend so much so quickly to enter the CGT space? The answer lies in future-proofing the business. The pharmaceutical industry is moving away from traditional small molecule drugs and toward advanced therapy-piece treatments that use living cells or modified genetic material.
Gene therapy.
Gene therapy. And these are exponentially more complex to test and critically to manufacture.
So CRL realized that if they didn't become indispensable in CGT, they would miss the next major wave of drug development.
Exactly. They needed to position themselves as the necessary scientific partner for these highly specialized, complex fields. And this required buying expertise and, crucially, buying specialized manufacturing capacity.
Detail the acquisitions that drove this monumental pivot for us.
They started by focusing on the cell side of things. In December 2019, they acquired HemaCare for $380 million, followed by Solero in 2012. These companies focus on the highly specific sourcing, collection, and handling of critical cellular material used in cell therapies, which are often customized, patient-specific treatments.
Then came the real game changers in 2021, focusing on the gene side.
Correct. In February 2021, they acquired Cognate BioServices for $875 million. The stated goal was explicit: to create a premier scientific partner for cell and gene therapy development.
So they weren't hiding their ambition.
Not at all. Cognate brought immediate expertise in the complex development and, more importantly, the manufacturing of these advanced therapies.
And they followed that up in May 2021 with Vigene Biosciences.
Vigene Biosciences, acquired for $292.5 million, is a dedicated gene therapy contract development and manufacturing organization, or CDMO. This is the ultimate vertical integration.
A CDMO, explain that.
Now, gene therapies rely on something called viral vectors, essentially deactivated viruses that deliver the therapeutic gene into the patient's cells. Manufacturing these viral vectors is incredibly difficult, highly regulated, and capacity was scarce globally, especially after the pandemic.
So CRL moved beyond testing and assessment. They are now involved in the actual making of the complex components required for gene therapies. That introduces a potential complexity, though. Does being the manufacturer and the tester of a product create a kind of conflict of interest?
That is a critical insight for the listener. The industry relies on firewalls, transparency, and strict regulatory oversight to manage that tension. But strategically, for CRL, the advantage is overwhelming. They control the vertical supply chain. If a client uses CRL to manufacture their viral vector, they are highly incentivized to use CRL's specialized safety assessment teams, who are experts in testing products they themselves manufactured.
So what does this all mean when we synthesize this entire century of activity, from rat cages to viral vectors?
It shows CRL transforming in two critical ways. First, they built an immense economic moat by consolidating all the mandatory preclinical testing services. Second, they ensured their longevity by investing massive capital into the most complex, high-growth area of medicine, gene and cell therapy manufacturing. They are embedding themselves not just into the testing phase of medicine, but into the actual production and quality control of the future generation of drugs.
Now that we understand how critical Charles River Laboratories is to drug safety and development, we have to address the dual nature of their business. While indispensable for new medicine, they operate in a realm that is inherently fraught with public scrutiny and ethical challenges: the use of laboratory animals.
This tension is structural. It's built into the business. The current regulatory environment, specifically in the U.S. and Europe, mandates that certain safety assessments, particularly toxicology, must be performed in vivo,
In living organisms.
in living, complex biological systems, before human trials can begin. The controversy arises when that necessary use of animals butts up against ethical standards, operational failures, and growing public opposition.
What are the specific animal species that have been the focus of concern in the source material, and why those particular ones?
The focus of concern has consistently centered on specific species known for their cognitive abilities or their environmental sensitivity. We're talking about dogs, primates, and horseshoe crabs.
Right.
Dogs are often used in toxicology studies. Primates are crucial for complex neurological or immunological studies because of their biological similarity to humans. And the horseshoe crab, as we've discussed, is used for that vital microbial testing.
Let's look at concrete examples of this controversy because they really illustrate the operational pressures CRL faces across its global network.
We can trace high-profile scrutiny back to 2014. CBS News reported on concerns regarding poor conditions for research dogs in their Massachusetts facilities. These kinds of incidents highlight the difficulty of maintaining consistent, impeccable care standards across thousands of animals and multiple facilities.
Then, in 2019, Fox News featured insights from a former worker, which raised specific questions about internal lab practices and the level of oversight within a facility. So the internal accountability necessary to manage such complex environments.
And a truly distressing incident was reported in 2020 by the Sunday Post. It detailed a whistleblower accusation concerning safety breaches after animals were killed in a horrific-sounding incident they labeled a compressor horror. These public disclosures, regardless of their immediate resolution, are incredibly damaging and underscore the absolute need for zero tolerance in facility management.
And the pressure is certainly not diminishing. We see it continuing right up to last year, with groups like Born Free USA protesting Charles River's plan to export 1,000 endangered juvenile longtail macaques to Cambodia for testing in 2023.
That macaque protest raises the conversation beyond just facility management and into global conservation politics. The use of primates is particularly contentious due to their cognitive capacity and their frequently endangered or vulnerable status in the wild.
Right.
While they remain critical models for specific types of cutting-edge research, think HIV treatments or advanced neuroscience, the scientific necessity is constantly weighed against the intense and valid ethical opposition from conservation groups worldwide.
Let's zoom in on a specific biological resource that generates controversy but is absolutely central to CRL's microbial testing services: the horseshoe crab blood issue.
The horseshoe crab is, scientifically, one of the most remarkable animals on the planet. Its ancient blue blood is unique because it contains something called limulus amoebocyte lysate, or LAL.
LAL.
Yes, and it clots immediately upon contact with even trace amounts of bacterial endotoxins. This LAL test is the regulatory gold standard used globally in microbial testing to guarantee that medical devices and injectable drugs are sterile and safe.
So, while the focus is usually on mammals like dogs and primates, this tiny marine creature is an indispensable component of global drug safety. What is the ethical dimension reported in our sources concerning its use?
The 2023 NPR article referenced in our source material highlights the intense harvesting pressure on this species. The article notes that coastal biomedical labs are bleeding more horseshoe crabs with little accountability for the overall health and population of the species.
This connects CRL's core business safety testing directly to broader environmental concerns.
Exactly. The company, through its EndoSafe subsidiary and microbial testing services, is highly reliant on this resource. The demand for LAL is immense, and it's non-negotiable under current regulatory frameworks, but the implications for the sustainability of the horseshoe crab species and the environmental impact of the harvesting process. These are significant external pressures. This forces companies like CRL to navigate the fine line between providing absolutely critical human safety testing and ensuring ecological responsibility.
So, given this persistent ethical scrutiny from whistleblower claims to conservation protests, how has the company responded? How did they address this structural tension within their business model?
The source material provides the counter context by noting the company's internal initiative, which they launched all the way back in 2002, the Humane Care Imperative.
Detail that initiative for us. Was it a PR move or was it a necessary operational requirement?
I think it had to be both. The Humane Care Imperative was explicitly designed to raise awareness and train employees on animal welfare's importance. This wasn't just soft public relations. It was an acknowledgement that animal welfare is a critical component of their regulatory compliance and their scientific credibility.
How so?
Any failure in care risks the integrity of the research itself, and any public scandal risks their crucial institutional contracts, like the one with the NCI. Therefore, ensuring humane care is an operational necessity as much as it is an ethical mandate.
What's remarkable is the simultaneous acknowledgement of their business prowess and this ethical requirement. In that same year, 2002, the company was also named Company of the Year by the Boston Globe.
And this simultaneity perfectly encapsulates the tightrope that Charles River Laboratories walks. The necessity of animal models for regulatory safety assessment, which saves human lives and brings valuable medicine to market, is constant. But the ethical pushback is also constant. It forces the company to invest heavily in transparency, internal accountability, and finding alternatives, even as current regulations continue to require in vivo data. Navigating that inherent tension between scientific requirement and humane standards is central to their continued operation and profitability. It's a structural tension that really defines the entire CRO industry.
So to bring this comprehensive deep dive to a close, let's synthesize the journey. We started with Henry Foster buying 1,000 rat cages in Boston in 1947, filling an unsexy but critical need for standardized research models. Today, Charles River Laboratories is a $4 billion global leader with over 20,000 employees.
And their key function, even as their sophistication exploded, remains standardized rigor. They act as the necessary institutional bridge between basic scientific discovery and official regulatory approval. They move from providing standard rodents to genetically engineering sophisticated models to managing full preclinical toxicology studies. And now, they are vertically integrated, manufacturing the complex viral vectors required for the most advanced gene therapies on Earth.
They became indispensable through strategic financial integration, purchasing key toxicology leaders like WuXi Research and MPI Research to consolidate market share, and making that bold, multi-billion-dollar pivot into specialized manufacturing via Cognate and Vigene.
Then concluding with the so what for you, the listener. Charles River Laboratories is a definitive, powerful example of how specialized contract services have become utterly central to global pharmaceutical innovation. They enforce standardization, they drive efficiency, and they accelerate drug development timelines. However, this vast centralization of expertise also centralizes the complex ethical concerns inherent in the development process. And that demands constant vigilance and a proactive response to public scrutiny regarding the use of critical research models, from primates all the way to horseshoe crabs.
This incredible journey of expansion, integration, and capitalization, where the company goes from supplying the tool to manufacturing the final component, raises one final provocative thought for you to consider.
Okay.
Given their aggressive acquisition strategy, particularly in these cutting-edge areas like contract development and manufacturing organizations, the CDMOs for gene therapy, how much further can companies like CRL integrate themselves into the drug creation ecosystem before they fundamentally stop being merely the pharmaceutical industry's partner and effectively become the pharmaceutical industry itself? What are the vast economic, scientific, and ethical implications of such concentrated, centralized expertise holding the keys to the future of medicine?
It's a fascinating and a necessary question for a company whose foundations were built on just 1,000 cages and a commitment to standardization.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Charles River Laboratories International, Inc. We hope you feel thoroughly informed.